Hi there guys, Gary again here for GMVFX. Welcome to another one of our little tutorials. Well, this is not so much a little tutorial, this is the first part of a three-part tutorial where you'll be able to hopefully do something that the end looks a little bit, if not better, than this. Obviously now I'm sitting here hoping that you're looking at something cycling on the screen, which is about 4 seconds long, and it's of grass waving and some monolithic standing stones which have got some really weird sort of displacement on them. And then a very ropey background that I pulled up from Unsplash, which wasn't quite right, but it will do for now. Because it's not necessarily about how it looks, it's more about the technique. For me, it's all about making sure that other people know how to use this stuff properly. And then you can apply your artistic talents to this wonderful software to generate exactly what you want to generate. But today, I want to start this three-part tutorial by looking at the lovely wavy grass here. So let's get to that as soon as we possibly can. So what we're going to talk about right now is that grass. Now obviously there's been a lot of talk about geometry nodes and how amazing they are for making things appear and in shapes and so on, making rocks and micro rocks and medium-sized rocks and blades of grass and whatnot. And it is wonderful, you're absolutely right, but it's all static pretty much. You know, you can add rotational animation, but you're not going to get that flowy stuff. One of the things that I love the most about looking at fields, I'm very, very lucky actually, I live in the countryside. And when I take my dog for a walk in the mornings, or if I just go for a walk, occasionally we'll just go past fields that are swaying with the wind. And I love that because you get this beautiful flow. You get this wonderful flow of the wind blowing through the grass, and it just creates this amazing sort of series of waves, almost like waves on a sea. You cannot do that with geometry nodes. So we're going to talk about doing that today. So basically we're going to start off with our default scene, and yep, I'm getting rid of that. It's become pretty much, I think, my thing now. It's let's get rid of the default cube as fast as we can. And we're going to add in, let's add an object, let's add a mesh, let's add a grid, let's press F9 to pop open our controls. Let's increase the size to say, well, let's say make it 12 meters. And let's set the subdivisions just a bit. We don't need to set the subdivisions high, but I'm going to set them higher because we might want to just change the shape a bit. So let's just do that. So there we are. We've got our grid. But you can't really see it because we haven't turned on the visibility of it. So there you go. There it is. In fact, let's very quickly just go into sculpting, and let's also turn on the wireframe. Now, I do like seeing the wireframe on top of the solids. So I find it quite pleasurable. So let's go here and let's just very quickly let's just lift this up with the sculpting tool here, and just to give us a little bit of height. This takes me back actually, because doing this reminds me very much of doing exactly the same thing with what used to be called the artisan tool set in Maya, which it just basically ended up being just sculpt tools. But it was when Maya first began, back in the days when I was a young boy. I was actually in my 20s, but back when I was in my mid-20s. That makes me laugh. Now you know how old I really am. Very old. So this tool set, there were two types of Maya as well. There was Maya Complete, and there was Maya Unlimited. And Maya, what you get now is basically just Maya Unlimited. But Maya Complete had just had the basics, and then what you really wanted was Maya Unlimited, and they knew that, and they marketed it that way so people would get Complete and then go, yeah, but if I had Unlimited, and then upgrade. Very clever marketing, but hey, got you where you needed to be. So anyway, yes, this sculpting thing is very similar to the way I would have done it back with Artisan. So let's go back into our layout rather than modeling. I'm just going to go and set this to smooth. There we go, to shade smooth. And let's just turn off lay wireframe. There you go. So what we've got there is just a little bit of landscapes. I'm going to change that grid. I'm going to call it landmass. It's not a mass of land, but it is a land mass. So the most important thing here is to go across. If you obviously want particle grass, you've got to put particles in there. So let's hit this button here, which is the particle system. And at the moment, obviously, there's no particle system on the landmass, so let's put one on. Let's click that, and we'll get a particle system. And I'm going to call that particle system part grass or grass 001. There we go. So that's now got its name. and it's set to emitter. So if I press play, there you go, it emits balls and they just drop. We don't want them to drop, we don't even want them to be balls. We want them to be, in the end, we want them to be sort of like a little strippy wiry thing. So fortunately for us, we haven't got to put in a replacement object, because what we want is we actually want the full flexibility of the particle grass. So let's change it to hair, which essentially is the grass system. And if I just play that, nothing happens. And I'm going to turn on advanced because there's nothing. So there's rotation is missing from here, giving us more control about where the hair actually points and whatever. So I'm going to turn on advanced, and when I do that, rotation appears. I think also what else appears? Velocity, I think, as well, and the physics pretty much standard comes in. Yeah. So let's just turn on the rotation. When we have things like velocity, and you think, well, why do you need velocity for hair? Well, the reason is because it's the speed, the way something is falling away, pushing away from the surface, is essentially, it is essentially the length of the hair. Now, we don't want that long, so we just reduce the normal length, and that immediately says, well, that's the length of our hair. Now, at the moment as well, also it looks a little bit ropey because there's not a lot of information to it, and that's because we haven't got a lot of, you've got hair length there, but, if you do it, that you can see that when I reduce the normal here, it reduces the hair length there. Essentially, it's the same thing, but I like to change it in the velocity for some reason. I don't know why. I don't need to. And I'm going to increase the number of that up to 5,000. Should we do that? Yeah, that's quite quick. Obviously, if you've got a slow machine, I recommend you reduce the number, but that's okay. Let's leave that at that. So the velocity controls our length, and then the rotation in here controls our the way the hair is pointing. Now currently it's on velocity hair. So here we have our hair with the rotation popped up, so we can see that. I'm going to change it from velocity hair to normal tangent. Now nothing really changes on that score at all. I'm just going to put up the randomizer a little bit, which won't have much of a bearing at the moment, but it probably will do later, he said, hopefully. And then let's pop open the physics, and we have a mass of 1 kilogram, and the physics type is Newtonian. Well, that's absolutely fine. We need to keep it on, but we can adjust the shape and stuff by, if I just turn that to none, and then you'll notice that I've got nothing that I can do here. If we have it on Newtonian, which is what it's set to normally, I can add a bit of structural change to it. You can see this. I'm going to change the let's just change it to Eevee, and I think it's on Eevee, isn't it? There you go. Look, it's got shadows. Oh god, that's like some sort of weird hairdo on someone, very thinning hair. Let's change it back to the Eevee one, and I'm going to go down here to the bottom, and I'm going to just very quickly assign a shader to this object, and you can see there's nothing in there. Let's go new for a new material. And let's change it over to the shading menu so we can see this properly. If I change whatever color I change on this, it changes the color of the hair too. So we'll use that to our advantage. What we're going to do is I'm going to create a Musgrave texture. I'm going to see that there. Control T with a node wrangler just to get up the texture mapping control system. And if I plug that into the base color, what will happen is that you'll see these go black to white. So some of the hairs will be black. There you go. You see that some of the hairs are black, some are white. It's fine if you want an alien landscape like that, but that's not exactly what I want. But we do want some way of changing the variety of this. So I'm going to increase the scale here so it feels more grey and white in the hairs. And then I'm going to go into the color, the vector converter, and I'm going to get a color ramp, drop that in there. Still gives us our black and white. But also you'll notice that it's actually not as clearly cut black and white now. It's sort of like a little bit more differentiation in it. What you get there is values that go higher than 1. So we will go back into here, so it looks like grey, and we're going to add a color remap, which is basically a map range. And we're going to say, well, the maximum value is 1, the minimum value is 0. But let's take that from some lower values and some higher values. So we get to about there. There we go. And let's move that down a tad. So we've got white. There you go. But we've got some better differentiation between the white and the black. It's a bit more grey is basically what I'm saying in the middle. So just because we want a bigger range to play with. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to bring this up and bring that across to a green. So let's change that to the second one. That's another way to do it. clicking on them sometimes is a bit of a pest, so what you do is you double click on the value here if you want to get that open, but if you want to actually move to the next marker, you actually click on this to go to marker position 1, and then you can get that up and get that up and just go, right, well, let's change that to slightly blue or green. Let's make that darker. And you're starting to get something that feels more like a grass kind of color, but let's just add a few more in here. So let's take that one and move that. Let's take that one and move that to a slightly yellower version. And let's stick another one in between those. Let's make that a little bit darker. And let's try and put one here. Let's just move that across. And we'll make this one slightly kind of a greeny, honeyish kind of color. So we've got a much more variety of color going on in our fur now, our impromptu grass as it will be. So now we can see them slightly better. And what I'm going to do now is go back to the object, pop open this again, and at render point we're currently got it on path. Now you can, this is the thing, you can go and you can change this stuff to an object, and then you can decide which object is going to be. So I could actually say, right, well, let's make it the landmass. It's not working, of course, because you're connected to the landmass. But you can put another object in there if you wanted to, just to explain and make it obvious. Let's create a UV sphere. Let's go back here and let's set that to be the sphere. And now you're getting lots of little balls all over your surface. And they will not be doing anything, they'll just be sitting there because our dynamics are kind of turned off. So, which is pretty much what you need for this sort of thing. But obviously I don't want an object, and a collection will give you a variety of objects. So if you've got a collection with, say, 5 different things in there, you can randomly apply them over the surface. If you're not happy where they are, you can go here to the seed and then just cycle it, and it'll change the position of them. It's good stuff like that. You can also just have, so if you've got 4 or 5 things which are the collection, you can have it so the collection, if you change from object to collection, it will have those as a group, or have them like whole collection, or you can have them so it just randomly picks one, which is pick random. But what we want to do here is stay back with path, and we use the material 1, which is the one that's actually on the ground. That's okay, that's not so bad at all. But it still looks a bit sparse, even though we've increased the numbers. Well, let me just go and get rid of that sphere. So what we need to do is basically give it more to do, essentially, on the surface. We want to be able to see more of it. So first thing I'm going to do, by the way, is I'm going to go down here to children, and we've got simple, which basically bunches it all up, which is much better. You can see straight away it feels a lot more like grass, or bunchy. But if there's any motion to that, it kind of does it in clumpy areas. Now, what you can do instead of having simple is to have interpolated, and you'll notice there's a bit of a shift straight away. You see the change almost immediately, where it kind of seems to be forming the shapes that you've got around you from the original ones. So if I turn it off and then go interpolated, you can see it feels similar. The reason for that is what it's doing is it's looking at each strand of hair and saying, I want to be, if I'm between this strand and the other strand, I want to be somewhere between these two in terms of look and finish. And that's the way you do that, which is great. And then we can adjust the length, which adjusts the length of everything overall, but you can adjust the length and then change the threshold, so you get a little bit of difference in height. And if you want to, you can change the seed as well. So you can see it kind of boiling between the little ones and the other ones. And then also we can start looking at things like clumping. So we'll avoid, we've got all the stuff we've got here, but let's avoid parting. It doesn't seem to do a huge amount, I don't think. But what you can do is you can then make them clump. So you can actually combine them together at the top, so they all kind of come together, sticking together at the top. However, if you move it in a negative direction, it pulls them together at the bottom, which is essentially more as if you're doing like clumps of grass. That's probably what you'd actually have. They would be closer at the bottom, but they wouldn't be this intensely close, I don't think. So what we can do is we can take that up a little bit and have that feel a little bit more like grass, doing it that way. And then what you can do is you can bulge it or not, depending on whether you want to. So you can bulge it or pull it in. So if you go with go down to a -1, it sucks them all closer together. If you push them the other way, you'll find there's a bit of a bulge appears just above the base. So if you can just about see these here, if I do that there, I'm going to leave that back at point basically at 0, because I quite like that. And there's also clumping noise, which it just allows you to add it's a little bit more variation into the clump. So some of them will clump more, some will clump less, and you can make it bow a little bit more. I'm not going to bother with that, actually. I quite like them just as they are there. Now, this is where we can get a little bit more variety in there, quite a bit more in fact, is to go into the roughness. So if I click on, so if I push up uniform, again, you won't be able to see a huge amount unless I start to reduce the size. And the more you reduce the size, the more you see the clumping appearing. You can then reduce the endpoint and say where exactly is the roughness happening. So if I stick that down to 0, it's happening less not so much at the top, not so much at the bottom, but more at the top as you go further up with the value. So if I set that to 1, you can see it spreads it out quite a bit. So it can look very, very coarse. I recommend that. It's about 0.2 is probably about right. And then again, shape, you can dictate whether it's the roughness is from the bottom, all the way from the bottom, which is at 0, or you can say it starts, if 10 is the top of it, it starts somewhere halfway around. If you set it to about 2 or 3, I think that is kind of length dependent through the roughness. And then also this kink, which if I put it on, you can see the wave is probably the best one. You've got a spiral, which basically spiralizes the hair exactly as you expect, because it's thinking it's hair. Braiding it, again, it's like a braid. But wave is quite nice because it just puts a small sort of like motion through it, which actually looks can look quite lovely. But the moment that's Eevee, the light is basically washing it all out. You can't see a thing. Let's just go to our light, change it to a sunspot, and change it from 1000. That's probably more prominent. There we go, 50. So there you go. That's better. So now you've got a better view of what you're creating. Now that's already looking pretty good for grass. There's a bit of a highlight coming on that, but again, that's the shader. So we can say, right, well, if we actually are using grass, basically you will get a little bit of subsurf from that. I'm not necessarily certain it's a good idea so much, and the subsurf would basically be chlorophyll, so you would get that green coming back in. You can reduce your specular tint. Again, it's things like roughness. I mean, if there's no roughness, it's just really reflective, but that wouldn't be the case. So you push that basically up to the top. Don't even think about metallic. Keep it out of the equation, and you pretty much got a lot of grass, really, or grass, however one you say it. Once we've done that, let me see. Well, I think probably it's best we start to add the wind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up back here to my top of my outliner. I'm going to add a new collection, and I'm going to call this Forces. Now, there's a reason for this. In the more recent versions of Blender, before you could just add a force, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But what they've done with the particle system is they've said, right, okay, well, let's go for tidy. So if you create forces and you put them into a collection, then you can connect the collection to the particles, which means therefore you can have multiple particle systems that respond to different force collections, which is brilliant. Really sensible. It means you don't have to just rely on one force field, which is going to drive everything. You say, right, well, I want one turbulence on this one, but if I have another turbulence in the scene, I only want it to be connected to these ones, which is how you do it. So you put your forces in collections, and then whatever's used in one is not usable in another, which is good. So in here, I'm now going to add, and I'm going to add a force field, and I'm going to add turbulence back down the bottom here. Now, immediately, if I go back to the animation window, in fact, let's just change it to the modeling window, and let's stick in a very, very Maya-ish thing, really. Let's stick in a timeline like that. And if I scrub through this, you can see nothing is happening. Why is that? Well, it's because we haven't applied any of this force, which is here, turbulence, actually to our scene. I'm going to lift it up, by the way. And the moment I do that, you can see it is connected, but it doesn't do anything because it's not actually moving. Now, I want it to be properly connected rather than this global connection. So let's go back to our landmass, and we'll go into our particle system, and we'll go down here to field weights, and in the collections we'll put in forces. So now again it's still, oops, didn't want to do that. Now again it's still doing what I would want. It's still moving like so, which is good. But I want to actually just make a few alterations to this. At the moment, if we go to where is it? There it is. If we go into our settings for the force, it's on point. It's got a strength of 1. Its size is basically the size of the amount of wibbliness. At the moment it's on nothing, but if I increase the size, in fact, if I increase the size of this, you'll see it kind of scales up so it becomes bigger. The bigger it is, the more it feels, there you go. You see, when it was smaller, you got a lot more pockets of turbulence because it's a lot tighter. And obviously the strength is 1, which is fine, I guess. Yeah. But again, you see there's nothing moving. Well, the reason for that, we need to make it work a bit more like airflow. So I'm going to basically put flow into here, and then I'm going to actually move it. You can put a little bit of noise on it if you want to, which is kind of almost like turbulence. In order to get a turbulence field that moves across a surface, you have to move the turbulence. It's not like a rolling turbulence. It's just a turbulence. So if, for example, smoke rose up through the turbulence, it would wind its way through the turbulence because it goes through essentially the cracks in the turbulence. If you see what I mean, it's a way of moving things fractally in space. And the moment you move that object, that then kind of gives the impression of the turbulence is actually animating. So this is what we're going to do, which is why you can see it actually moving when I do this. So if I go back to frame 1, and let's, we've got to potentially have an empty with this thing. On the keyboard, let's press N on the keyboard, and let's just insert keyframes on that there at 1. And let's change this to 100. Okay, so let's go to frame 100 as our last frame. And I'm going to move this all the way to there. And I'm going to press I again on there, so there's a keyframe. Now at the moment that has got an ease in, ease out, because that's the global settings. So let's go to the animation. Let's pop open the transforms, and let's change this actually to a graph editor. And we can see on our Y location, we can see that there is our animation line. Let's press T and let's change it to linear. And now when we go back and view it here, if I just go back to the beginning, what we have is this lovely sort of summery wind blowing through the grass kind of feel. And that's pretty much it, I guess. I mean, you can adjust all sorts of things if you want to. You can add a little bit of noise to it if you want to. I actually do like a little bit of noise. You can probably see there's a little bit in there. It just adds a certain something, I think. And if you want the size to be, you want the ripple to be even bigger, so it's even less, it's just like one big mass that's moving. 50 is maybe a little bit high. Let's set that to 10, and we're starting to see kind of a global gentle sort of, there's something happening. Change it to 5, and let's just stop this. Let's set it actually to say 2.5. There we go, and let's play it now, and there we're getting a little bit more. In fact, it's probably going to see it better if, oh crikey, if we're here. There you go. So it is that kind of quite windy blowing through it, and it actually can look really, really beautiful. So let's go here, let's press N, let's go to view, let's click the camera to view, let's move this about so it's a little bit more appropriate to grass. So it feels like we're looking at the bank a little bit more. And again, if you're not happy with the bank, you can always go in and change that. But if I just play this through, and then let's put that on the render view. Fundamentally, what you've got there is the grass that you'd need for the rest of the scene. So I hope that's of good use to you. I will be doing the second part and the third part very soon. And I will speak to you later, and take good care of yourselves. And yeah, just stay safe. Take care, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your mates. Take care, bye.